Hello and welcome to the Student Empowerment through SEL and Music Education webinar series. Thank you for being here for episode 4, Supporting Neurodiversity through SEL and Music Education. My name is Rebecca Hoff from Save the Music Foundation. Save the Music is proud to partner with the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning to produce this free webinar series. Lastly, this work was made possible through the support of KKR COVID Response Fund, a sponsored project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We thank them for making this possible. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our facilitator for today's episode, Dr. Scott Edgar, Director of Practice and Research for the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning. Scott.
Rebecca, thank you so very much. What an honor to be able to come back and bring to us some better understanding of how neurodiversity, social and emotional learning, and music education can work together. We know that when we utilize SEL as a cut and paste, one-size-fits-all construct, it just doesn't work. Well, in this episode, we're bringing together leaders from the field to really help us better understand how we can truly utilize SEL to achieve music for all and amplify all of our students' voices. Our guests today are leaders and are visionaries in this field. We'll start by introducing Dr. Elise Hammel. She is the recipient of the Virginia Music Educator Association Outstanding Educator Award and current president-elect of the Virginia Music Educators Association. She is a member of the faculty of James Madison University and has many years of experience teaching instrumental and choral music. She is co-author of 4 texts on this subject: Teaching Music to Students with Special Needs, a label-free approach; Teaching Music to Students with Autism; Winding It Back, Teaching to Individual Differences in Music Classroom and Ensemble Settings; and Teaching Music to Students with Special Needs, a Practical Resource. Dr. Hammel is president of the Council for Exceptional Children, Division for Visual and Performing Arts Educators. Our next guest will be Elise Hackl-Blumstein. She is a neurodivergent accessible music teacher and accessibility coach in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, working with neurodiverse individuals from preschool through adulthood. Her contributions can be found in Music Construct Ed and F-Flat books. Elise has also contributed chapters for Portraits of Music Education and Social and Emotional Learning and Teaching Music to Students with Special Needs, a Practical Resource. Finally, to get the perspective of a music therapist, we've asked Eugenia Hernandez Ruiz to join us, who is an assistant professor of music therapy at Arizona State University. Her clinical expertise is in the area of naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions and music interventions for children, teenagers, and young adults with autism and their families, as well as women and children survivors of domestic violence. In 2004, she founded a music therapy agency in her home country of Mexico, where she provides clinical services and continuing education opportunities for professionals regarding music therapy, autism, and domestic violence. As you can tell by their bios, we are in for a treat. I would like to invite Dr. Hammel to come on and help us better understand neurodiversity, music education, and social and emotional learning.
Good evening. Many music educators have been practicing SEL principles for as long as music education has been a career. They exemplify these by taking the time to get to know their students, creating musical experiences that meet the needs and interests of their students, and honoring the growth and change over time in behaviors that include their students' academic, musical, social, and emotional gains. While some music educators prioritize those academic skills and behaviors, these educators prize the whole student and everything they bring to the classroom. Rather than homogenizing each class, they seek to highlight what each student has and knows, and they create differentiation. And this was happening before the word differentiation was even codified. By knowing that everyone has a unique set of neural pathways and ways their synapses process, we can begin to understand that students who are neurodiverse bring a richness and diversity to the classroom it's impossible to obtain when only those who learn in a neurotypical way are included. It's just different. My own brain learns differently, and I have come a long way from hiding, ignoring, and trying to pass as neurotypical to now owning my differences and using them to diversify any situation I'm in with my quirky learning and ways of being. I know that partly as a result of my own experiences, I don't like labels at all. I advocate a label-free way of speaking to and about those with exceptionalities, disabilities, and differences. However, when I must, I prefer to be a person with disabilities. Some people with disabilities advocate to be addressed as a disabled person rather than a person with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act states that we are to address those with exceptionalities as a person with a disability or to name that disability. For example, a person with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. However, many in the disability community prefer to be addressed as a disabled person. For example, an autistic person. I am autistic, or I am deaf, or I am LD for someone who's learning disabled. My best advice when communicating with someone for the first time is to begin with person first language and then immediately switch to identity first once the person or someone close to them lets you know that they prefer identity first identification. This idea is similar to using pronouns correctly once you know what a person utilizes for themselves. 3 elements of SEL that are essential for music educators to understand are that students must be aware of and understand their own feelings, be aware of and understand the feelings of others, and then the ways those feelings may connect or disconnect within a relationship. To have a responsive classroom, we must immerse ourselves and our students in experiences that help them understand themselves, others, and how we interact. Because music is so collaborative and relies a lot on community, SEL and music are a perfect place to practice these sets of skills and levels of awareness. I have found in my own teaching, it's just been enriched, as in recent years, a plethora of new ideas and SEL experiences, many of those from Scott Edgar, have entered the music education landscape. One difficult aspect of SEL is that students are often asked to reflect on their experiences through writing about them. For students who are neurodiverse, this request can feel anywhere between difficult and impossible. Many students with differences do not express their learning in typical ways. The ways we ask our students to let us know what they know must be varied and inclusive. Some students with disabilities demonstrate learning through speaking, so oral or oral-led through the assistance of technology or another adult. Showing kinesthetic movement, dance, interpretive motions, and seeing, icons, emojis, technology-assisted or adult-assisted, so speaking, showing, seeing. They need those to demonstrate their emotions and their feelings. Through adapting our instruction and assessing our students, we can assure that everyone has their best opportunity to demonstrate what they know and how they feel. These adaptations do not need to be restricted to students with the paperwork, right? IEPs and 504 plans. They're for everyone. By embedding and practicing these strategies in a number of modalities, we're not only ensuring each student gets what they need, we're also modeling social emotional learning strategies and an inclusive environment ourselves. Measuring growth and attainment of SEL principles is critical to answering the question, how, what, why, how much do my students know and understand? Honestly, the best and most holistic way to do this is to watch your students and ask them to let you know in the best way for them what they're feeling and whether or how they understand and can name those feelings and emotions. You may also find it meaningful to observe your students during class and look for those behaviors, both within themselves and with others, for measures of their growth. Our ability to provide SEL embedded instruction and to measure the effects of it was greatly challenged by the COVID-19 pandemic. The isolation, lack of schedule, trauma, and sense of lost time was very difficult for students who are neurotypical. For students who are neurodiverse, the experience was in some cases catastrophic. The exact number of students who never returned to school may never be known. However, I know we lost many students. They disappeared and they never came to school again. To lose the ability to work with teachers and support staff costs time that students will not get back, because many students age out of special education services on their 22nd birthday. The loss of opportunities is palpable. They lost hundreds of thousands of dollars and hours of assistance that they were to have been provided. They were sometimes left at home with no adult, no way to access online learning because they require an adult to assist in their learning, or because they no longer had the social, behavioral, and academic supports they needed. The return to in-person learning was also a very bumpy experience. As the return to group learning, a new schedule, and the constant refrains of learning loss caused some of what they had been experiencing and enjoying about school to continue to be omitted in a sincere desire to catch them up on academics. The result, as we've seen, has been behavior disruptions, absenteeism, and continued learning loss are occurring. It's my informed opinion that the lack of SEL instruction and experiences in some schools is a contributing factor. More than ever, our students need, deserve, and must experience SEL as part of their school structure. When we know we matter, understand and can express how we feel about ourselves and others, and know how to adjust what we are feeling and saying to meet someone else where they are, we become better students, musicians, and people. The trauma we all experienced during COVID-19 and are still experiencing must be understood and expressed before we can really continue into this third decade of this century. I remember teaching a class in a school full of historically excluded students. They were accustomed to harsh discipline, a majority of negative interactions with adults in school, and to feeling hopeless regarding their future. So we began to implement a school-wide SEL program, and I was pretty proud to be example teacher in the process. The school environment did not immediately improve. SEL does not show its effect immediately. It's a way of being and living that is honestly counter to what's commonplace in American education. The changes at school started slowly, and we're seeing first in classrooms that had teachers who'd been intuitively teaching this way prior to being part of the school-wide effort. It took almost an entire school year. However, the results were astounding. To visit the school a year later showed an almost entirely different atmosphere. SEL works. SEL works with students who are neurodiverse. SEL is essential to music making and to the development of future generations who will lead with informed insight regarding relationships, emotions, and how we can be as a people together. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this panel. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Hammel, what a gift. And as much as I want to jump right in and dig deeper with you right now, the format, so everybody knows, is we're going to have all three of our participants give their insight, and then we're going to have a wonderfully rich discussion. So Dr. Hammel, thank you. We'll see you in just a little bit. I'd like to invite Elise Hackl-Blumstein to share her perspective as a practicing teacher.
Hello, and thank you all so much for having me. And I'm going to continue to jump right in after the wonderful Dr. Hammel. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has drastically impacted our students, especially neurodivergent students, but also ourselves. And not only does SEL make a huge difference and really just fit with neurodivergent students, but it also fits with us and with universal design for learning. UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, is one of the main tenets of special education. You might have heard this even referenced as theories of multiple intelligences, as Dr. Hammel was talking about with differentiation, and even being put into some multi-tiered system of supports in school systems. So the three main tenets of the Universal Design for Learning really all focus around multiple means, which is exactly what we were just talking about, having multiple ways to represent things that we're showing students, where that may be visuals, having multiple means of engagement, and also having multiple means of action and expression. So when Dr. Hammel was talking about a main tenet of SEL being reflections, writing does not work for everybody. For my students, multiple means of action and expression means that they're allowed to reflect in ways that are meaningful to them. It's taking the pieces of their culture and their life that ties into that identity piece, the SEL piece, identity of who they are, and understanding a little bit more about themselves. In a world where a lot of neurodivergent folks are still trying to understand their identity, I know I am, as going through the diagnosis process of somebody who was first a special educator, now I'm neurodivergent and kind of going along that path. I'm still struggling with my identity. So to have pieces that allow me to reflect in a way that's meaningful to me makes a huge difference. With my students, having a switch to communicate that they're ready to be done with something goes wonders. When they can't speak the word no, they can tell me in other ways. And it's respecting that. It's respecting part of the identity so that students can feel safe in the classroom. That's another way of doing action and expression. So that falls right into universal design for learning. When we think about SEL, we also really think about belonging and what it means to belong in a classroom. Many times, our neurodivergent students are not included in a classroom, or they're told to go sit in the back and play with something, or they can watch students participate. That's the one that I get the most. Every student can succeed if given the right supports. Every student can succeed when given multiple means of representation, utilizing visuals, utilizing communication. And it's our job through SEL and UDL, Universal Design for Learning, to ensure that they have the skills so that not only can they actually participate in our classroom, but they have a willingness to want to participate in our classroom. It is so huge to have students come into a room where they know that they can be successful. And I'm not saying that they're just going to waltz into that room and be able to do anything that day, but to even know that they could potentially do it makes a huge, huge difference. It just makes students feel comfortable. And then there's that agency. When students know that they can be part of a classroom, they want to show up, they want to come to music, and maybe they can't sustain 30 minutes of a music class, and that's okay. It's providing what works for them. So thinking again about that multiple means of action and expression. How can we utilize SEL and UDL to promote identity, agency, and belonging with our students? And I'll even take this back to the COVID-19 pandemic, something that we've all lived. We've all had to adapt and give ourselves accommodations. We've had to accommodate the way in which we engage with friends and family. That's our actions. That's the way we express ourselves. We've had to deal with taking in sources of information from lots of different places and deciding what works for us. Sometimes the choices are overwhelming, just like for our neurodivergent students. When the choices are overwhelming, sometimes we have to stop and refresh. Sometimes we have to take a break, and giving our students the opportunity to do so goes a long way. But most importantly, it's about supporting student voices and supporting student choices and giving students the opportunity for choice making. In my classroom, students can choose the schedule of events that we're going to do that day. I know we're going to have these 10 things that we have to do today, but allowing them to pick a structure that works for them to schedule their own breaks really ties into that goal setting, but also helps them understand their own needs. It really feeds into that identity. Having a voice in what we're doing in the classroom gives them a sense of that belonging. It allows them to have the agency to want to participate in our classroom. Sometimes it's that we're going to be doing an activity and maybe it's just a standard and we have to do it. It's part of our state assessment. We got to do that one. But the standards are so wonderful because they don't say exactly what we have to do. They provide us with a general statement that we can then adapt utilizing universal design for learning to meet the needs of our students. So, for example, when we are thinking about student voice, how can a student demonstrate their knowledge? How can a student provide that they are growing and learning? So for example, if a student is supposed to be playing a 4-beat pattern, do they have to play it on instruments? Not necessarily. Can they identify which one is the correct pattern? Can they point to a visual that shows the correct pattern? Can they arrange the pattern utilizing different manipulatives? If I'm doing a listening assessment, which is something we really, really utilize in our classroom, especially when we're thinking about how music conveys emotion, which is something that a lot of neurodivergent folks, including myself, struggle with, having visual cues, showing and giving examples so that students can understand what is even being asked of them can go such a long way. And when I think about student voice in the music room, I think about the fact that, a lot of my students haven't necessarily been included in the classroom. Some of my classes are peer buddies classes where they come with a gen ed music class. Sometimes it's just a self-contained special education classroom, and sometimes it's multiple special education classrooms or one student pushing in. It really just depends. So the background knowledge is immensely varied, just like our background knowledge is immensely varied. We can't assume that students come in with any knowledge without really discussing it with them first and working with them to make sure that we are having an equitable playing field. A lot of times we utilize symbols. So if I go up to a student and I'm trying to have them read a rhythm, but they've never seen a quarter note before, how can I get there? And sometimes that means taking the same lesson and breaking it down into 20 different things so every student can succeed. But on the other end, every student can succeed. Allowing students to utilize their voice in a way that is meaningful to them and meeting them where they're at is so important. I can't say it enough. I was actually talking earlier today with one of my students about how sometimes it feels like when people are talking very quickly to them and not using their communication device, they're speaking another language. We can't expect our students to follow through with an activity, to understand the expectations put on them when it feels like they're being spoken to in another language. They just can't process it. We just can't process it, especially after the pandemic, coming into a stressful situation. That structure is changing, especially for autistic folks. The structure is so important, and understanding consistency. And when we don't have that, it can be immensely overwhelming. So walking into a room where we've lost our structure, where we're not speaking the same language and we're being told to do something, we don't know what's happening. Meeting us where we're at just makes so much difference. If you remember anything from this, think about those multiple means, the representation, the way in which we work with our students, the way in which we share information. Whenever we're speaking, providing a visual, utilizing their form of communication. Dr. Hammel said, just like pronouns, identity first versus person first language, same with communication. Whatever the communication preferences of the student, however they communicate, that's the way that we're going to communicate, because that's the way that we can not only actually work together, but learn about each other and build a great rapport, build that sense of belonging, and remind students that they are a valued part of our classroom, that they are a member of our classroom community, and that they belong in our classroom community. Accommodations and modifications are just part of what makes social emotional learning work for our students with disabilities, but they go hand in hand. SEL is built about understanding ourselves, promoting advocacy for ourselves through the use of supports, and creating a sense of community and belonging. Thank you so much for having me. I would love to dive deeper, but I know we have a lot to do today and there's lots of questions.
Elise, absolutely beautiful. And of course, I definitely want to jump into a lot of that. A lot of times when we're starting to talk about social and emotional learning, we frame it as music educators are not counselors. Music educators are not therapists. Well, we figured that this would be a really good episode to actually talk to a therapist so that we can better understand a little bit of what that difference is. So, former music educator, now music therapist, Eugenia Hernandez Ruiz, please come.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Alice and Elise, for those wonderful presentations. That just sets the stage for what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to share my screen because I have a couple of videos to share with you. So yes, in fact, I was a music teacher before I was a music therapist. And I have to say that's what got me started in my interest in how music could be used for children with disabilities. I am going to start by explaining a little bit of the differences that I understand between music therapy and music education, what the contribution of both these fields have to social emotional learning. I'm going to give you a couple of video examples of my work in the autism spectrum, and then I'm going to try to give you pointers, share with you experiences of what a music educator could do to help these children. By the way, this is a very probably simplistic difference, and I could get in trouble with my peers if they saw me, but that's okay. This is a difference that is going to have practical application in this discussion. So what would be the difference between music therapy and music education? The first and foremost, I would say, is the purpose. In music ed, we change behaviors so people learn to play music. Whereas in music therapy, we use music to change behaviors. Also, an important difference is that music therapists have training working with vulnerable populations and in other types of healthcare that are going to make a difference in different settings. All right, so I know it's simple, but it's important. Another difference is how we, music educators or music therapists, contribute to social emotional learning. I would say that music learning contributes to SEL as part of quality of life And you do that every time you teach a child to play music and incorporate it in their life. Music therapy, on the other side, is going to develop social emotional learning as a main goal. We work for that. And of course, we are going to do that particularly when we are working with people who may have limited access to quality of life because of other factors in their situation. Music therapy works with children in the spectrum, neurodivergent people, not only in the spectrum, but neurodivergent people. And we use music very intentionally. We have found a lot of literature, actually, that supports the use of music, for example, in autism. Let me give you an example of this rationale. Autistic children may have diminished responses to caregivers' behavioral and physiological cues, limiting their social communication from infancy. But we know that music can amplify that communication by making it more salient, by allowing that rhythmicity of the music to make those cues of interaction more obvious, and then children can engage in that exchange of communication. Let me give you some video examples to make this clear. This comes from a research project where I was working with the parent. I never worked with the child directly. I was working with the parent to help him use his own musicality to engage with their child. Let me tell you that this is the first session before we started working, and please observe the quality of their interaction.
Good. What color is that? What color is that clover?
Clover.
What color is it?
Green.
How do you spell green?
Hey.
That's right, G-R-E-E-N. What shape is that?
It's a diamond.
Yeah.
It's orange.
How do you spell orange?
O-R-A-N-G.
That's right, high five. You're so smart. You know where it goes.
Okay,
Good.
so what you saw here is a parent trying to play with their child. Of course, the child is playing a perfectly acceptable game, which is a puzzle. No eye contact though, no reciprocity. The parent is only asking questions, kind of in a quiz, academic quiz. There is no back and forth. And the problem with that is that play should be reciprocal, should be engaging. Let me show you what happened after 3 or 4 sessions of working with the father and sharing music strategies and behavioral strategies
Good.
to change their interaction. Here we go.
Okay.
I'm singing.
All right. You ready to start? Happy and you know it?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're... That was awesome. Stop, stop. If you're happy and you know it. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it. Yeah. What's next? If you're happy and you know it. Hooray! If you're happy and you know it, shout hooray! Hooray! If you're happy and you know it, then you're... If you're happy and you know it. Hooray!
So as you can see, it's a drastic difference in their interaction, difference in how much the child is engaging, a lot of spontaneous behaviors, eye contact, laughter, playing. And the reason I bring this, obviously, this is a father with their child, but the reason I bring this to you is that I work with the adult in the room. I worked with the adult for them to change their behavior. And you saw the child blossom once the parent changed their behavior. So what were the key behaviors that we worked on that made a difference and that you as a music educator could change and improve? One of them is observation. You can see how the parent is in the second video observing very carefully what the child is doing and trying to do. And he is supporting those efforts, and he's allowing the child to propose, and he is complementing the interaction. Positioning. The parent is looking for a way to position himself in front of the child so that there's easy access in that conversation. I understand that as a music educator, it's a little bit more complicated, but if you pay attention in your classroom to set up the environment so that neurodivergent students are able to have easy access to you or to whoever is the main interlocutor, then they are going to have a better response because they are going to have the resources to understand and respond. It's child-centered. As you can see, they were working with their interests, with the child's interests. Elise already said it, universal design, right? Yes, we are going to start where the child is and with their interests and preferences, and going to embed that into our lessons in this case, therapy. A lot of visual and motor support, meaning gestures, facial affect. He was exaggerating, the father was exaggerating their gestures so that the communication was easy and comprehensible for the child. Concrete language, very specific, short instructions. Are you ready? Let's go. Yay, well done. And so that the child didn't get confused with a lot of verbiage. They knew what was coming. Attention to sensory overwhelm. Although in the second video, you see a lot more stuff around, actually they are positioning themselves in a place where the attention is focused on each other. Paying attention to sensory overwhelm with neurodivergent students is critical if they are going to be successful. And also, and this is really important, and one thing that music does beautifully for us is timing. Timing of the interaction, being able to wait, to pause and listen to the child and let them propose. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to wait enough, but you can see in the second video how much back and forth is happening because the father learned to wait for a response instead of providing all the answers or all the questions, just being able to wait and allow the child to communicate. So these are behaviors that any person working with a neurodivergent student can include and quickly incorporate into their space. Another thing that we can do is collaborate. Neurodivergent students may have very complex needs. There's a spectrum, right? It's not a single way of learning. And so I would recommend assess, as has been said before. Alice said that. Said that. Let's assess what's happening. Let's make sure that we are taking data on the learning and that we can see and observe and notice what's going on. If we don't have all the answers, that's perfect. I don't think anybody working with neurodivergent students has all the answers. It's really complex. So let's consult and let's talk with other people, special educators, music therapists, other music educators who might have more experience in this area. If I see something that is beyond my capacity, my training as a music educator, well, then let's refer them. There will be someone who may help with that. Or on the other side, you may find that your neurodivergent students just blossom in your space because music is something they may love and they could do really well. Let's share those strategies and those successes, because this is a team effort. We have to change. Real inclusion is not about changing the child, it's changing the environment so they can blossom. And that's, in a nutshell, what I would like to do. I have a few resources here that I have shared in a PowerPoint. Just wanted to say that the ASD video glossary is a phenomenal, I think, resource, because it gives you videos of young children and you can see those behaviors in a very concrete way and how they are a little bit divergent. Also, NAFME has resources for you, and the American Music Therapy Association also has a fact sheet to work with individuals with autism or autistic individuals. And if you want more information, please feel free to contact me. And references, of course.
Eugenia, that was fantastic. Thank you. And what I loved about that is there was a question that I had teed up that you went ahead and just answered in terms of references. We're going to explore it a little bit more in just a few seconds. But at this point, I would like to invite the rest of the panel onto the screen. So Elise and Alice, please rejoin. And it's time for us to have a nice discussion and what's at the heart of this. I would be remiss going any further without thanking Kira Rizzuto, our Director of Programs and Partnerships at ArtsEd SEL, who's going to be working behind the scenes in the Q&A and feeding them to me so we're able to have a really nice dialogue. So Kira, thank you so much for your service tonight. I'd like to actually start by throwing a question to Elise. We've heard a lot of terms. We heard a lot of terms in all three of your presentations, and I just want to be crystal dictionary clear. Can you help us define what is neurodiverse, what is neurodivergent, and what is neurotypical, so we can all wrap our heads around that?
Absolutely. So we'll start with even just neuro, right? The beginning part of the word neuro, brain. So neurodiverse is that it's a diversity of brains. It is every brain. Every brain is different. Every person's brain is different. So neurodiverse, I work with neurodiverse individuals, lots of different people with lots of different brains and lots of different awesome minds. Neurodivergent is the divergence from what we would once deem a typical brain. So brains function a little bit differently, whereas neurotypical is what we would deem general education brains that function in a way that we've deemed normal over time. So I am neurodivergent, meaning that my brain is not a typical brain, coming to terms with that. And we're learning and we're growing.
Elise, thank you so much for that. And especially thank you for your vulnerability and putting your own self into those definitions. You know, a lot of the things that we have been talking about right now, and we heard it come up in all three of your presentations about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially for students who are neurodivergent. Just yesterday, we had a major moment in history when the Surgeon General of the United States declared a mental health crisis for our youth, and it put out resources to say that this is going to be front and center, and that social and emotional learning is going to be something that is going to be one of our key strategies in combating this mental health crisis, especially for our youth. So Alice, if I can throw it to you just to dig a little bit deeper on this one in terms of, if I had to say mental health crisis with students who we're speaking about today, neurodiverse, neurodivergent, what does that mean to you, and what are some warning signs that you think we should have as music educators to say, okay, this is something that I need to maybe pull on one of the strategies I've heard, or as Eugenia said, maybe this is some time when I need to collaborate with somebody a little bit more deeply than what I had planned on doing?
Many students in our schools right now are in crisis. They have difficulty getting themselves to school. They have difficulty enjoying the activities that they used to enjoy. They have difficulty completing their assignments, keeping track of things. Their brains are so full of all the things that have happened and the ways that they're trying to manage that they can't really function well in school. I think what we need to do is we all need to take a step back on the whole learning loss thing and focus more on how our children, how our students are as people, how are they feeling, and having more chances to just talk with them, music or no music. I mean, just talk to them about how they're feeling, what is it feeling, and what can I do to help, which is the thing that we can say to any student in crisis, and even when they're not, right? How can I help you? What can I do? I think a lot of it is because we didn't go back to school and immediately in many places thinking about social emotional learning and how to help our students. We just jump back in with this. We've lost a whole year and we need to catch up with academics, and our students were not ready for that. All of them, not just the ones who learn differently, all of them. And I've been attending a mental health crisis workshop all day today, and I'll be at one tomorrow, kind of talking about the seriousness of this and what we need to do to help our students. And so, yes, collaborating with each other to help teach students how to collaborate with each other, modeling good behaviors and ways of being, I think, is the only way that's going to help us out of this.
That modeling piece, Alice, it's so critical, and it has to come from teachers. I believe that it is absolutely about modeling, how administrators are able to empower teachers, how teachers are able to empower our students. Elise, I know you're in the classroom day in and day out now. What are you seeing with your students amidst getting back in with the mental health crisis?
It's great that you said that too, because what I'm seeing in the classrooms and what I'm hearing everywhere that I go is the behavior is out of control. That's what we're hearing everywhere, right? But we have to remember what behavior is. Behavior is communication, right? So our students are communicating to us all day long. All students, our neurodivergent students, our neurotypical students, when there's an issue that's happening at school, it's because a need is not being met. So it is our job to collaborate with each other, to look at students' IEPs if they have one, if not, to look to our tiered systems of support in our school building and to understand how we can help this student get what they need. And then we can help them communicate what they need. But they are not going to be able to learn if their basic needs are not met. And if they're in crisis, we have to get them out of crisis before we can start to do anything else.
Absolutely. And Elise, I'm going to stay with you for just 1 second, because I want to really embody the students who you see day in and day out. We know what the extreme, I'm ready to move on behaviors, that level of communication looks like. But what are some more small scale tiered things that we can say you used in your presentation? When I'm ready to move on, when I'm done with something, what does that look like in a safe, small space so it doesn't get to something more extreme?
Absolutely. And I think we have this really desire to not feel like a failure as teachers. And so we're like, I want students to be in the room. I don't care what they're doing. But sometimes students just need to be given the opportunity to take a break. So sometimes for me, if a student is in crisis mode, sometimes they are able to do a center activity in the back of the room. And I have manipulatives ready to go so they can keep their fingers busy while their mind is processing. Sometimes for my students, I know they're just going to bolt out of the room. So it's kind of building to the point of where first I had a sign on the door that said, hit me when you need a break. And the goal was for them to just touch it as they left the room. They were going to leave the room anyways, right? But it's starting to build that communication. That's turned into a switch on the door that they hit that says, I need out now. Or now we even have, they're on Amazon. It's like $10 for multiple buttons. One of them says, I need a break. One of them says, this is my last activity, or I need help. And they can hit that switch and we can start to get them on their way. So it really is thinking about, I might be able to say I'm in crisis, but when I'm in a panic attack, I can't communicate that. I might need to use augmentative communication systems. Sometimes I can write, I'm done on a sheet of paper. Sometimes I need to leave, and it's finding a way to communicate that. So we've kind of turned it into going from use your words is something that we hear a lot in the special education community to tell us what you need, and then respecting whatever way the student is telling us what they need and saying, okay, maybe you have been trying to escape what we're doing in class, but there's a reason that you're doing that. So let's find out that reason first before we just say, oh, you've been to the bathroom 10 times already this half hour. It's differentiating those pieces.
At least getting at that why, 100%, understanding what the communication is. Eugenia, a lot of what Elise and Alice just said tears into the videos that you showed us during your presentation. Very, very powerful examples of how do we engage with our students. And, in a past life, I was able to spend some time working in the area of play therapy. And we understand that play is the language of youth. Heck, play is our language of how we start to engage in communicating. So I wonder if you can help us a little bit understand how we can build on that philosophy of play to help some students who we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And in fact, the work that you saw is play, right? It's based on play. In that particular study, I actually was comparing a play-based intervention with a music still play-based intervention. So what I would say, it's let's use music as it was originally designed to be used, for play, not for a concert, not for others, not for a production. Of course, we eventually get there, right? But let's start with using music as play, and then make it more spontaneous, allowing more spontaneous improvisation. And I understand there's a curriculum to get through, right? But if we can inject in some of that curriculum spaces for playfulness and improvisation, and just let's go with the flow and see what happens. Let's get silly and let's see what happens. That's when a lot of the processing happens.
And Eugenia, at least I see your hand. We're coming to you next. I think so much of it is fear on the teacher's part of saying, oh, but I have to give up. Oh, here it comes. Control. I have to give up knowing exactly what's going to happen every second in the classroom at every single moment. And if I prioritize the process, I'm not going to know. Well, that's okay. That's what we're talking about today. That's exactly what we're talking about. Elise, what do you got?
There are moments to do that.
Absolutely. And moments not to. And, if we really are gearing up, I was talking to some groups of a group of teachers from New York City earlier today, and we were saying, I know in myself, I do a lot more SEL early in the process rather than the day before the concert. There's moments that we get it. Elise.
I love the way that you said that, because really the music standards, the way that they're written and the way that our curriculums are written around the national standards, it is about connecting and responding and not performing for other people, right? Performing for a variety of contexts, absolutely. But they're written in a way that makes sense for SEL. They're written in a way that they are already differentiated. Even looking at the way that they go through grade levels, it's just less and less supports, right, as we go along. So we get in this headspace of, oh, I have to do it. It's based on the standards, but really that's the way I was taught, or that's the way I was taught previously. So I saw this in the chat too. How do we help adults in the community realize this? When we're focused on our performances are for our community, with our community, building that agency, that belonging, that identity, involving parents as members of your community, having a sing-along. Those are always the performances that my community gets the most excited about. We're going caroling right now, one classroom at a time, one day, because we can't have a real concert. So we're caroling in the hallways, and I have never had more support than I do in this moment of trying to bring people together.
Absolutely. I whenever we have like a beginning band concert, I have a bucket full of cowbells right at the door. And if a parent wants to bang on a cowbell with, hot cross buns, let's go at it. Dr. Hammel.
I was thinking also in answering that question about schools, again, still being really concerned about the learning loss and the academics. And what I find with my students is I guess kind of like Scott said, I preload the SEL right at the very beginning, along with procedures, so that my students feel really safe. Elise described that fabulous procedure of, well, and you need to get out. Procedure, my students have procedures for everything. This is how we come in the room. This is how we go to the instruments. And we practice the procedures like they're games. Because if you call it a game, it's a game, until they've got it. And then once they learn how to pick a partner, I say, okay, now we can do a game that involves picking a partner. So especially in the beginning, I spend so much time getting to know my students, letting them to know me, to know each other, to know our procedures. And then I find that the academic skills, they come so much more quickly. And there's room for all of it. There really is. That's all.
And Alice, I think it does come down to this false dichotomy. It's like, am I doing this or this? Am I doing music or SEL? And as all three of you were speaking so brilliantly, my mind went to, and this is at the heart of UDL, so I get this, but it's like, this is just good teaching. This is great for any and everybody so that we are just heightened awareness of meeting our students' needs, cultural relevance, EDI. We talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I think especially with the germane conversation we're having tonight, sometimes we forget about that I in this capacity. So we have a question that kind of gets at this, that I'm going to read verbatim because I want to make sure that I capture it. And then this really gets at the idea of IEP goals. And, I always advocate for our music teachers to have a seat at the table, because if we don't have a seat at the table, we're unable to advocate and to affect. So the question is, so how do we navigate this need to address the SEL needs of individual students without neglecting their IEP goals? There is so much pressure within the school to focus specifically on those IEP goals, since that's what is being documented. How to navigate the conversation with administrators mostly. So there's an advocacy piece of this here also. Anyone feel brave on this one? Eugenia, go for it.
And then Elise, of course. But I just want to say that you were saying something really important, is that we as educators, as therapists, sometimes think that if we start a play-based intervention, we're going to lose control. I think we lose control in the fact that, yes, the child is going to lead the interests, the materials maybe, and whatnot, but I'm still in control of those objectives. I am going to embed the goals, the academic learning, the words, the language acquisition, whatever the IEP goal is, within the play, because that's how children learn, through play. So if I'm thinking, okay, they need to work on saying thank you, I'm going to create a play situation where they have to say thank you. I don't know we are going to play with food, and every time they give it to, or the doll is going to do something, I'm going to include the word thank you or something like that. I mean, silly, but it's going to be embedded within the play situation or within the song. It's something that we really do a lot in music. So music therapy. So it's really about embedding the goals, myself as an adult, within the play situation. Elise?
Yeah, you said, and I'll just summarize, same thing. We're not modifying their goals. We're still working to meet their goals. We're just accommodating and changing how we're going to achieve those goals, right? We're not changing what we're doing. We're changing how we can get there with students. So by changing how we do it, we can build agency for students to be part of their own goals. That's the ultimate goal, right? With IEPs, is that students can advocate for themselves. We're going to teach them how to advocate for themselves within that goal. How can they regulate to meet that goal? That's what it's about.
And, I'm going to just highlight the last part of this, because I think this is where a lot of our teachers are right now. How do you start this conversation with administrators who may not understand that? Any thoughts on that?
I think one way to bring administrators in is to literally bring them in. Say, I would love for you to come watch my class. And then let them watch how you can do naughty kitty cat, work on rhythm skills, so sounding out words, so phonetic, and at the same time helping build community and culture in your classroom, as everybody's so delighted to be there and so excited about the cat and what we're doing. I mean, it really works. So I invite them in my classroom, say, come see what I'm doing. And which is how in that school, why it was the principal came and watched me, and she said, I want to start doing this school-wide. Would you let all the teachers come in during their planning and watch you? And I said, sure. So I think they just need to be brought in and just see what we're doing, and that it really all can work together. It works great.
I would also add, let's start from a place of partnership. Once I saw a presentation in the academy during the COVID pandemic, I heard a music therapist said, I'm great with my online sessions if only the parents stop interfering. I was like, holy cow, we have to bring them in. They are in the room with the child. So bring them in, don't fight them, make them partners.
And I think finally, it's remembering that we're all on the same team and stressing that. At the end of the day, we're all here for the students. So when we can remind administrators by bringing them and by collaborating with them, We are all here to meet the needs of the student. We're just going to do it in our own way, which is what SEL and UDL is all about. That's what education is about. Creating people that feel good, that have that identity, that have agency to be there, and that belong in our society, which we all do.
I want this entire episode to be on a bumper sticker. That is just absolutely perfect when we're talking about how do we embed. And this is just another layer of how do we embed it into the musical process so that we can help our students build so many capacities. There is a comment, and I just want to address it live here, hoping that we're going to send all the links, PowerPoint, so we can share these in faculty meetings and with special ed teachers and wellness center director. And the answer is yes. And all of these are going to be available so that we're going to be able to put this. The best space, and Elise is a great example of this, of people who have engaged with social and emotional learning and now become professional development facilitators who are doing this work. So the example of these folks, the folks who are watching this now, to be able to learn and go back and communicate and be advocates. But one thing that I just heard in all three, from all three of our guests, is that it's all about relationships. And it's all about trust, and it's all about listening. And, those relationships are so multifaceted. And right now it's hard. It's hard to build relationships when we are all under so much stress, so much trauma. And we respond to trauma in very, very different ways. Dr. Hammel, I want to throw this to you. To start, just because I know you've written 4 books on it and I want you to brag about yourself. Is there a place where we can find books or articles that talk about the benefits of music in kids with autism?
Sheila Scott wrote a brilliant book. Sheila is Canadian, about teaching music to students with autism. And then I wrote one with my co-author Ryan Harrigan, teaching music to students with autism. I know you can find Sheila's book on Amazon and mine too. So I would look there, teaching music to students with autism, and be sure to look for Sheila Scott. Her book is gold. So.
As we're coming to the end, I'm just going to ask for any parting thoughts. Is there any last minute thought that you want to leave with our participants who are watching today to get us to think in terms of neurodiversity, social and emotional learning, and music education? Maybe we can start with you, Alice. Absolutely.
What a wonderful world we live in, and what an amazing time to be alive, that we are addressing these issues with students, that this has become a way of the future and what we will be doing in the future with our students as communities. Can you imagine what it'll be like in 50 years? It's a very, very exciting time, and I am more than thrilled. And I encourage everyone to learn as much as you can about this. Try it yourself, talk to friends, ask people. It will change everything. So I'm so excited to be here, and that this is a part of what we're doing right now.
Beautiful. Elise?
Eugenia was ready, but we're good. I think it's just extra important that we are all here and we're all willing to learn, and remembering as we're trying this, that trying is growth, and growth is not linear, and we're going to fail, and that is okay. And our students will see the effort that we're putting in. Their experiences are valid and our experiences are valid, and there is no one way to do it. And trying to grow is growth. So thank you all for the time that you're putting into this, and for recognizing that our students are all different and have different needs, and using music as a way that we can prove that music is for everyone.
And Eugenia?
Very quickly, just going to say that although indeed neurodivergent students have some different needs and some different ways of learning, the overarching idea of community, or need of community, living up to their greatest potential, feeling accepted and understood, that's like any other child, and we have to keep remembering that.
I can't think of a better way to end. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Dr. Hammel, Dr. Hernandez Ruiz, and Elise. Thank you so much for all the gifts you've given us tonight, giving us a better understanding of how neurodiversity, social and emotional learning, and music education intersect. Thank you so much for the gifts you've given us. Rebecca, back to you.
Thank you, Scott, Alice, Elise, Eugenia, for a wonderful discussion and sharing your stories and expertise. I feel very fortunate that we could hear from you all and all together. Very special. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you again to the KKR COVID Response Fund for their generous support of this series. Thank you all for being here. Wishing you a very merry holiday season and Happy New Year. Good night.